Amy, you're the arts administrator for the city of Tacoma, and since 1999, you've rolled out all kinds of innovative art programs. You've built a creative foundation that our community's been able to grow and go forward in ways even beyond arts. You've helped start things like Spaceworks, art murals around town, and you even got those art reps for those ugly little gray boxes at the intersections. That's huge. These little touches of beauty. You've helped us paint the town red and just about every other color in the palette over your time. And yet, you're originally from Milwaukee. You traveled the world studying and creating art. What ultimately brought you here to Tacoma?
Well, Megan, funny you should ask that. I moved to Tacoma actually 18 years ago this month, and I'm a newcomer, compared to the wealth of eras that everyone precedes me with. I used to come to Tacoma to go to the old Tacoma Art Museum when it was in the old bank building. I was living in Seattle at the time, and my ex-husband and I would come down because they had really great shows, and we'd come out and look for a place to eat lunch or something else to do, and I just think of Pacific Avenue as having tumbleweeds blowing down it. It was so seemingly deserted, and we couldn't understand it. We looked around, and as we all know, just the beautiful architecture and the views and the housing stock, and coming from the Midwest, it reminded me a bit of my hometown in Milwaukee with kind of the industrial feel and the bones of the city. And we looked around and we noticed that the University of Washington had invested here and the State History Museum had invested here. And I'd lived in DC and San Francisco and like I said, Seattle, and I always felt like I got there too late. Everyone would say, oh, if only you'd been here, X number of years ago, you could have afforded to buy a house, or you could have plugged into the community, or you could have, done all these things. And I grew up in a very tight community, a very active community, and in my adult life to that time, I hadn't had the opportunity to experience that. And I said to myself, I want to be the one who's in that town bragging about how cheap my house was, $103,000 in the future. So we bought a house in the South End. And I was lucky enough to get hired by the city shortly thereafter. And so I was perfectly positioned to be able to do whatever I could to help make this community be something. When I was interviewed to be the city's first public arts specialist, and I remember them asking me, like, how are you going to bring more artists to town? And I was like, I already brought two. Me and my husband are both artists, and we're already, increasing the pool here. And I was really excited because the city of Tacoma had used or decided to use arts and culture as a method for its revitalization. So I felt like there was this real mandate that I was going to be coming into a place that really embraced the arts. And I went around with this enthusiasm. And I'd tell some people, I'm the public art specialist, I'm going to be working to get more art in town, and isn't this exciting? And I was faced by some people with this massive resistance, and they'd say, public art? We don't do public art in Tacoma. Haven't you heard of the Tacoma Dome? I was like, what? So I went back to my office and found, files and files on this big controversy over the Tacoma Dome. And I'm certain many of you are aware of it, but for those of you who aren't, I'll just give you the nutshell synopsis. One thing I don't know if you all know is that Tacoma was one of the first cities in the nation to have what we call a percent for art, where 1% of funding of public projects goes towards the creation of art. And so Tacoma was pretty cutting edge. It was the late 70s, along with Seattle and some other cities, we put this in play. And there had been a couple little projects that had happened, nice little projects, but no big deal, until the Tacoma Dome comes. So all of a sudden there's a big price tag, a $280,000 budget for art. I'd take that now. Anybody, bring it on. And public art's a really new field, and back then even newer. So the city brought in these big curators from around the nation to help identify how to get artwork for the Tacoma Dome, and they brought in some blue chip artists, Andy Warhol being one of them, George Siegel, and a famous neon artist named Stephen Antonakis to submit proposals for the Tacoma Dome. Stephen Antonakis won the proposal, and his idea was to make the roof of the Tacoma Dome the biggest neon sculpture in the world. It really would have been very magnificent. But the roof manufacturer refused to insure the roof, and it just spiraled out of control into this terrible year-long sort of class warfare about whether you're pro-neon or no neon. And it really, you know, in my research, you know, because I'm looking back at this, it looked like class warfare. It was educated versus non-educated, white collar versus blue collar, North End versus South End. And I'm sort of astonished by this, having just moved into the South End and having a lot of sense of artists as makers, and you know, why is there this big disparity, and why is there this wall of fear that has to exist around this? It made me a little bit more trepidatious than I had been. I'm going to come in and, you know, make Tacoma all great, but I thought, I'm going to be encountering this fear as I go around the city. So we knew we had to get the percent for art back. We knew we had this mandate still to really get arts and culture, you know, thriving again. Did I tell you that the percent for art failed? Okay, that's a key piece to my story. After all these years of sort of this class warfare and this battle of pro-neon versus no neon, the idea of continuing to fund the percent for art was put on the ballot, and it lost. So in 1985, the city of Tacoma lost this funding mechanism. And so I arrive in town almost 15 years later, looking back on a time when the arts weren't flourishing as richly as they could have, where artists who had lived here at the time told me that they just looked north for their artistic experiences. And it really, you know, seemed to me like this big wound. Meanwhile, Seattle, their public artists were nationally known, and they were the standard bearer for how to do public art. So I decided, you know, working in the community is probably the best way to start to get things rolling. And my colleague, Marisa Craig, I'll call her out. I saw her up there on the screen, is an amazing woman. And she was working in the business districts to help create identity and placemaking. And that's a perfect place for public art. So I was going to roll up my sleeves and go help the community do public art. And the first project I got to work on was in the Dome District, which was ironic because of the whole Tacoma Dome debacle. And these folks wanted to do a sign to say, "Welcome to Tacoma." And I was going to go in and help them figure out how to do it better. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I went in and I was like, from out of town, I just moved here, and I was going to say, you don't want to just do a sign that's so parochial, you want to do this great art thing, and I pissed them off so badly. And I was mortified, and Marisa was disappointed in me, and I knew that she was this clincher, you know, ally that I had to have. And I remember going to some kickboxing class at the Y to try to relieve my anxiety, and I went home and I stewed about this, and I knew I had to get Marisa back in my court. So I'm a jeweler by training, and I was making these little switch plates for houses, so I knew she liked them, so I brought one. So through bribery and humility, I went into her office with this gift and this, like, please give me another chance. I'm not a jerk, I swear to God, I'm not an art snob, I'm a community developer. I don't know, you know, how I made that misstep, but I need another chance to talk with these folks. And thankfully, a little bit suspiciously, she used some of her social capital to get me back in to talk with the Dome District folks. And I was able to back up and admit my greenness. And we got to the place where we started to talk about what they wanted and needed for their district. We got to what is a creative space, right? Potential can be a creative space unless fear is in the way, right? So we were able to talk about what they wanted, and they got to define how they saw the Dome District as this funky industrial place and kind of like Granville Island in Vancouver. And then we were able to bring an artist in who worked with them and interpreted that. And what the end project are the palm trees. They're still there as you enter the Tacoma Dome District. And people were really surprised by that. Palm trees in Tacoma, that doesn't make any sense. But that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted an aha. They wanted something that stood out. And some people are like, well, why didn't you just do evergreens? Well, those are everywhere. You know, this was something that would really stand out. And that project was really important for a couple reasons. One, I learned that it wasn't about forcing the end product of here's a sculpture on the corner. It's about listening to community and giving them space to come and work with an artist to have an end goal that none of us expected. So that was really wonderful. And those folks ended up becoming great allies and helping us to pass the 1% for art, which we did in 2001. So we get this, woo! So we get the funding mechanism back, and then the real work began. My major project was the convention center, and again, a giant facility with a big price tag. And we knew that we didn't want to just have one artist do one project. We brought in lead artists Stuart Keeler, Michael Macknick, and then we identified 2 other projects for some emerging artists to participate as well. And that project was really challenging. I'm still pretty green. I'm a young woman. Public art is working in conjunction with the construction industry and architects and engineers, and mixing art into that is hard enough. But being a woman in that position and trying to move this project forward was really challenging in its own right. I know for a fact that there were people who just didn't want art at all. It wasn't even about it being controversial. They just didn't want to be bothered with it. And that was one piece of it. But then another thing happened that was really more surprising to me, and more of that ugly face of fear that I knew that we needed to get over. And that is, one of the projects that we identified was a partnership with the John Michael Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan. And it's really cool because Kohler is they make sinks and toilets and bathtubs. And what they do is invite artists to come and work in the factory to work out of the materials of porcelain and cast iron. And this artist went back there, and Ruth Kohler herself had chosen him. His name's Alex Schwader. And he was going to make 2 bathroom stalls, one in the women's room and one in the men's. And that's pretty odd, but kind of cool, it's sort of unexpected. And he sends back his prototypes of how he's casting these walls. And he'd been using tangerines and tangelos to make some sort of organic forms in the bricks that were going to form the walls. And they're a little sort of reminiscent of body parts, if you thought that way. And but it wasn't that big of a deal, but some people saw it in my leadership and made it a huge deal. They blew it up to a place that was just terrifying, that could have threatened the whole program. And it was surprising to me, because it wasn't, it was ourselves creating this problem. And it came to such a head, and I'm sick, because I'm remembering the Tacoma Dome, and I'm trying to, do this great experiment, and if it fails, what happens then? Pack my bags and go home, wherever, Anyway, luckily it came to a head. We were gonna have this big meeting, and the new director of the convention center was coming to town, and we're going to let him make the decision. So I hadn't met him. David Bobo is his name. And we're sitting in this room, and this big man, Southern man, big old white guy from the South coming in with a suit. And I thought, oh no, my own bias, he's going to be conservative. We're doomed. And he comes in, he listens to people, and he reviews the work. And he says, I don't really care much for the art. And I think, oh, swear word. We're doomed. He's like, I care about convention centers. He's like, controversy gets attention. Attention sells convention centers. I'm cool with it. And it just switched it like whooshed the fear out of the room, at least for me. I thought, we don't have to have this, be terrified of it, it's the end of the world is coming, we're gonna put some art up. It was about, let's look at the bigger picture here, people. We're trying to sell convention centers. This isn't that deep. So we moved forward, and in 2004 opened the convention center, and I gave tours to people. And I still had sort of this underwriting, remember the Tacoma Dome, you better hope this isn't gonna blow up in your face. And I had, Tacoma was there. Tradespeople, educated people, this big, the dichotomy between the two that I think is false, I know is false. And I was giving tours, and the trades guys would go in the bathrooms, they'd come out, and they were fascinated. They wanted to know how the things were cast. They were admiring the craftsmanship, how it was caulked, and really excited about it, which really gave me encouragement to my philosophy around makers are makers, and we have to stop putting this wedge between people, because if we want to build a good community, we have to be inclusive of everybody, and art is a way that we can do that. And that is part of what really inspired a lot of the things that Megan mentioned, was that, there was such scarcity and fear. and one big project for a bunch of money. How do we make sure that we cast the net more broadly, give people opportunities to plug in, identify how every discipline can participate, make sure we're hitting every neighborhood in the city, and things like that. So over the years, that's always how we're trying to think, so that the more art you see, the less afraid you are, because you see more examples. The more people get to participate, the more they see themselves reflected. I am never in my ivory tower choosing up art. Every public art project we do is we have a group of stakeholders and community members who, to help that process come from the beginning to the end. And I'll leave you with this. So in 2001 to now is 15 years, and they had that 15-year of desolation before. And I don't want to get emotional. Okay, so I don't know if any of you went to the Arts Month opening party the other day, but it was at the Asia Pacific Cultural Center in South Tacoma. And it was the first year that we took the opening celebration out of downtown. And some people said, oh, nobody's going to go down there. The people of North End's not going to go to the South End for a function. And they were wrong. So I looked around this room. This facility had 500 plus people through there from every faction of the city, every age, every ethnicity, every discipline. And I looked at that and I thought, this is my community. This is my Tacoma.